The Nightmare.
Welcome back to Teddy's Nightmares, a place where the ordinary becomes uncanny and the mundane turns mystical. I'm your guide on this eerie journey where we'll uncover the most chilling and inexplicable encounters from around the world. Tonight's episode takes us from the shadowy corners of attics to the ancient catacombs of Malta, each story woven with a thread of the supernatural. We'll meet entities that defy explanation, from trolls in attics to doppelgängers in the depths of history-laden tunnels. So, settle in, if you dare, for a night of ghostly tales and paranormal mysteries. But before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell to join us on every spine-tingling adventure. Let's delve into a world where the unbelievable becomes reality. Story 1. Encounter with a troll in the attic. I've always been hesitant to share this story, fearing disbelief, but it remains one of the most real and inexplicable experiences of my life. I wonder if anyone else has ever had an encounter like mine, one with a creature straight out of folklore. When I was about 10 years old, I had a chilling interaction with what I can only describe as a troll. This happened during a game of hide and seek, a game I played countless times in my childhood home. On that particular day, I chose to hide in our attic. Unlike the typical portrayal of attics in stories, ours wasn't creepy or neglected. It was just another room in our house, often used for storage and occasionally as my secret hideout. The only difference on that day was that the lights were off, leaving the attic dimly lit by the pale light filtering through the small windows. I found a spot to sit on the floor, surrounded by old trunks and boxes, my heart racing with the excitement of the game. That's when I heard it, the sound of something moving towards me. Initially, I thought it was my friend coming to find me. But the footsteps sounded heavy and uneven, not at all like the familiar tread of my playmates. As I peered into the shadows, my heart nearly stopped. There, emerging from the darker corner of the attic, was a short, stocky figure. It moved slowly, cautiously, as if it was unsure of its surroundings or what I was. The figure had long, messy hair that seemed to blend into the darkness of the room. I was frozen in place, my eyes locked onto the approaching figure. It was close enough now that I could see its features more clearly. Its skin appeared rough and leathery, and its face was round and plump, almost as if it was made of clay. Its eyes, dark and deep-set, examined me with a curious but unsettling gaze. Then it reached out. Its fingers were short and plump, the skin moist and cool to the touch. It gently touched my face, and I remember the distinct smell that accompanied it, a mix of wet earth and moss, like a forest floor after a heavy rain. Overcome with fear, I mustered the courage to move. I leaped to my feet and dashed out of the attic, my heart pounding in my chest. My scream alerted my mother, who immediately rushed to the attic to investigate. Despite her thorough search, she found nothing and no one. The attic was just as we always knew it, save for the lingering sense of unease. To this day, I swear that what I saw and felt was real. It wasn't a figment of my imagination or a trick of the light. The memory of that encounter has stayed with me, a vivid reminder of the mysteries and wonders that might lurk in the corners of our world, hidden away in places we think we know. Story 2. The elves of my Appalachian childhood. I was raised in the Appalachian Mountains, a region steeped in folklore and mystery, and my childhood home was no exception. My experience with what I can only describe as elves happened in the early 80s, when I was just a toddler, about 3 or 4 years old. The memory, though faded by time, remains vividly etched in my mind. It was a typical morning in our old house, and I was following my mother from my bedroom toward the staircase leading downstairs. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement that drew my attention. At first, I thought they were dolls, and as any child would be, I was excited at the prospect of dolls that moved on their own. I started to veer off towards them, my curiosity piqued. My mother, oblivious to my distraction, gently took my hand and guided me towards the stairs. She stepped onto the first stair and then turned around to pick me up and carry me downstairs. As she lifted me, my perspective shifted, and I found myself looking directly at the spot where I'd seen the movement. That's when I saw them clearly. There were about 4 to 6 small figures, no more than 3 inches in height, resembling what could only be described as elves. They appeared distinctly human-like, but in miniature form, all dressed in green suits. They were gathered in front of the window in the hall, engaging in what seemed like a peculiar activity. Among them was a figure that stood out, a female, larger than the others, about 8 to 10 inches tall. She was dressed in a vibrant red dress and bonnet, and she was attempting to climb atop 2 of the smaller figures stacked on each other. It seemed as if she was using them as a platform to look out of the window. I watched, transfixed, as she struggled to maintain her balance, stomping down hard on the head of the topmost elf in her effort to stabilize herself. Their struggle was chaotic, and it seemed like the smaller figures were having difficulty supporting her weight. Amidst this bizarre scene, the female elf's gaze met mine. Her face, adorned with makeup and bright red lips, exuded a sense of animosity. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, an inexplicable feeling that she harbored ill intentions towards me. We continued down the stairs, and with each step, my relief grew. The unsettling gaze of the female elf and the peculiar actions of the group were now out of sight, but the feeling of dread lingered. That encounter was the first and last of its kind for me in that house. However, the house and the surrounding hollow were no strangers to the unexplainable. Shadow figures and poltergeist activities were frequent occurrences, contributing to the eerie atmosphere of the area. My aunt, who still resides in the same hollow, had her encounter with an entity that resembled the elves I saw. She described seeing a shadowy figure, elf-like, with a pointed hat, about 12 to 14 inches tall. It was crouched beside her kitchen cabinet and scurried away as she entered the room. Like my experience, her encounter was fleeting but left a lasting impression. Growing up in an area rich in folklore, these experiences, though frightening, seemed almost a part of life. They've left me with a deep sense of the mysteries that lie within the Appalachian Mountains, mysteries that, to this day, remain unexplained. Story 3. The Unseen Terror of the Old Farmhouse. In the late 90s, my father made an unusual purchase, an old farmhouse with an attached barn, typical of the rural architecture in Germany. For the initial few years, the house was peaceful, a serene escape in the countryside. However, in 2003, when my father began remodeling, strange occurrences started to unfold. Initially, the disturbances were minor, inexplicable bangs, items toppling over by themselves, water taps turning on, and toilets flushing without cause. We attributed these to the quirks of an old house. Personally, I never felt entirely at ease there, often hearing noises from the attic directly above my room, resembling heavy furniture being moved. My father dismissed it as probably just squirrels, but these were no ordinary squirrels. Time passed, and things escalated. I was talking to my now husband on Skype late one night, thanks to the time difference, when he suddenly remarked that someone was walking through our hallway. My heart raced. It was 3 a.m., and the house should have been asleep. As I turned to look, the entire living room curtain fixture, firmly mounted to the wall, crashed to the ground. I ended the call, hurried upstairs, and found everyone asleep. From that point on, the occurrences intensified. Mornings greeted us with all kitchen cabinets and drawers flung open and the always locked basement door ajar. The air in the house grew tense, even visitors noticed, lights flickering, doors slamming shut without provocation. One of my mother's spiritual friends, whose best friend was Native American, offered to perform a cleansing. My mother agreed, but I also reached out to a local Catholic priest. He informed us he'd been to the house before and refused to return, upset that the previous owners hadn't disclosed the reason for the house's high tenant turnover. He shared a bit of the house's history. Around 1900, a farmer and his wife lived there. The wife, unable to have children, became bitter and isolated after her husband's tragic death. She died alone and embittered in the house. After this revelation, the house was calm for a while until my sister-in-law announced her pregnancy. The phenomena returned, more aggressive than ever, windows flung open, dishes hurled from shelves, objects thrown down the stairs. As her due date approached, the disturbances became unbearable. My siblings and I ended up sleeping together in my room for safety. One night, my brother screamed from his adjacent apartment. He saw a shadowy figure descend from the attic and head straight for the baby crib, causing it to topple over. That night, we all slept together in the living room, terrified. The next day, my mother called her spiritual friend. Even my skeptical father was unnerved. The Native American lady arrived, sensing a strong presence in the house. She offered us protective beans. I wish I remembered their name, and began a room-to-room cleansing with various items on a tray: sage, a burning substance, a feather, and something else. The most intense moment was in the attic. A wooden board flew towards us, nearly hitting my brother-in-law. The lady continued the ritual, insisting the entity had moved. We found the laundry room door closed. She entered alone, her chants growing louder. When she emerged, she looked exhausted, covered in ashes, declaring that the entity had put up a fierce resistance. She later explained that the former lady of the house was trying to protect us, especially my pregnant sister-in-law, from this malicious entity. A few years later, with my siblings off to college and me moving to Tennessee, my parents sold the house, which had returned to its peaceful state. The experience at the old farmhouse remains etched in my memory, a chilling reminder of unseen forces that sometimes dwell in old homes. Story 4. The unsettling encounter of 2009. Back in 2009, when I was in my early 20s, I had a habit of going on late-night walks with my friend, Tom. We lived in a quaint seaside town in the UK, characterized by its serene beaches and a vast estuary that stretched along the outskirts of the town. Our walks were a ritual, a way to unwind after the day's work. These strolls were never influenced by alcohol, especially not on weekdays, ensuring our experiences were as clear-headed as they could be. One particular evening, we set off from my mom's house around 9 p.m., following our usual route that snaked around the town's periphery. After about half an hour of walking, we paused to pet a stray cat near a building with a large glass front. As I was absorbed in stroking the cat, Tom's voice jolted me, "Check out that window. That's just bizarre." Glancing up, I saw an old man sitting in a chair, shrouded by darkness, staring outside with an eerie stillness. His motionlessness was unsettling. He could have easily been mistaken for a lifeless figure. We watched him for a moment longer, unease creeping up our spines, before deciding to continue on. Our route took us past the local dump, through a narrow alleyway, and near the town's boating lake, finally leading us towards the estuary. The time must have been approaching 10:30 p.m. The lavish houses overlooking the estuary soon gave way to a narrow, wooded lane that led directly to the water's edge. This was usually where we turned back, but that night, driven by a sense of adventure or perhaps folly, we chose to venture down the lane. The moment we stepped onto the lane, the ambience shifted drastically. The dense trees on either side swallowed what little light there was, plunging us into near darkness. The only illumination came from the faint glow at the end of the lane. We walked in silence, the atmosphere heavy with a chilling sense of foreboding. As we neared the water, about 20 yards away, we simultaneously halted. My gaze fixed on a shape at the end of the lane. It first appeared to be a signpost, but as my eyes adjusted, it morphed into a figure, broad and towering, standing about 7 to 8 feet tall. The more I tried to rationalize it, the more ominous it seemed. Breaking the silence, Tom whispered, "Do you see that thing down there?" I could only muster a quiet yep before, without a word, we both spun around and sprinted back up the lane. Those 20 seconds it took to reach the street felt like an eternity. A chilling sensation crawled up my neck, and I felt an overwhelming presence behind us, as if we were being pursued by an unseen force. Back under the safety of streetlights, we began to process what had just happened. We both had felt the same icy terror and the urge to flee without speaking. We described seeing the same massive, bipedal shape, enshrouded in a darkness that seemed denser than the night around it, a void-like presence in the shadows. We hurried back to my house, seeking refuge in the familiarity of South Park and the comfort of light. That night, I made Tom text me when he got home, a practice we, as young men, never really followed. The next day brought another eerie revelation. I had an appointment at a mobile retinal scanning clinic set up in a car park adjacent to the building with the glass front, the same building where we had seen the old man. After the appointment, I met another friend who lived nearby. As we walked past the building, I glanced at it, only to find it barren and devoid of any furniture. I recounted the previous night's sighting to my friend, who then informed me with a chill, "That's odd. My mom used to clean for an old couple who lived there, but they passed away years ago, and the place has been empty since." Goosebumps cascaded over me at that moment, just as they do now when I recall that night. A night that was supposed to be a simple stroll turned into a haunting experience, forever etched in my memory. Story 5. The Unsettling Midnight Visitor. It was a stormy night over a decade ago when an experience deeply unnerved me, an experience that still lingers in the back of my mind. That night, as I lay in bed, the sound of rain pattering against the window and the occasional rumble of thunder created a soothing, rhythmic symphony that usually lulled me into a deep sleep. But something was different. I was in a state of half-sleep when I sensed movement on my bed. It felt like my little chihuahua, Miko, climbing onto the covers and then standing on my chest. I remained still, barely breathing, not wanting to disturb him with the rise and fall of my chest. It was a familiar, comforting feeling, and I thought nothing of it initially. However, an eerie sensation washed over me when I heard Miko whimpering from his cage in the corner of my room. My heart began to race. If Miko was in his cage, what or who was on my chest? My eyes were shut tight, but the realization that something was impersonating my dog filled me with a cold, creeping dread. As I lay there, motionless, trying to control my breathing, I focused on the weight on my chest. It felt like a four-legged creature, roughly the size of Miko, around 20 pounds. But there was something unnatural about its presence, something that made my skin crawl. I knew I had to act unaware, to continue pretending to be asleep. I feared what this creature might do if it realized I was awake and aware of its deceit. Every second felt like an eternity, the weight on my chest a constant reminder of the bizarre and frightening situation I found myself in. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly, my mind racing with questions. What was this creature? Why was it mimicking my dog? The storm outside intensified, thunder crashing loudly, mirroring the turmoil inside me. Yet, I dared not move, not even to peek through my eyelids. Finally, after what felt like half an hour, the weight on my chest lifted. The sense of relief was immediate, but I remained still, not wanting to take any risks. It was only when the first light of dawn began to seep through my curtains that I allowed myself to drift back to sleep, the exhaustion of fear overcoming my anxiety. The next morning, I cautiously examined my room, half expecting to find some evidence of the nocturnal visitor, but there was nothing amiss. Miko was his usual self, seemingly unaware of the night's events. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, though. That night changed how I viewed the safety of my own bed, the one place where I always felt most secure. To this day, I wonder about that creature, its intentions, and where it came from. Was it just a curious animal seeking shelter from the storm, or something more sinister? The memory of that night remains with me, a haunting reminder of the unknown that might lurk in the shadows. Story 6. The unexplainable doppelganger encounter in Malta's catacombs. This bewildering incident took place in June 2022 in Malta, and it's been on my mind ever since, prompting me to share it here for any possible insights. The event unfolded in the ancient catacombs of Malta. I was in the country for an archaeological dig and had arrived a few days earlier with a group of friends, all of us sharing a passion for archaeology. Before the dig started, we decided to explore some local historical sites, including these renowned catacombs. As Roman-era archaeology enthusiasts, we were captivated by the catacombs' intricate design and historical significance. We spent around 2 hours there, exploring the nooks and crannies with a deep sense of respect, conscious that these catacombs were someone's final resting place, not just a tourist attraction. A few days later, our dig directors organized a team visit to the same catacombs, providing us with some free time to roam around. However, having felt a bit claustrophobic during our previous visit, I opted to stay outside in the shade while the rest of the team, including my close friends, ventured inside. I was casually scrolling through my phone, even making a TikTok video to pass the time, when suddenly one of my friends burst out of the catacombs, visibly panicked, calling out my name. When I responded, she rushed over, asking where I had been. I explained that I'd been sitting there the whole time, not once venturing near the catacomb entrance. She seemed perplexed and asked if I was sure I hadn't gone inside. I reaffirmed that I hadn't. Shortly after, my best friend and roommate, who's with me as I write this, emerged equally flustered. Her face fell when I told her I'd been lounging in the shade while they explored. She shared that a group of our friends had been frantically looking for me inside the catacombs. They were certain they had seen me, even conversed with me, only for me to vanish, sparking fears that I'd gotten lost in the labyrinthine tunnels. My roommate recounted that she'd stood right next to me, making a joke, and another friend claimed to have seen me walking about. They were adamant that I had been actively engaging with them in our surroundings. To dispel their disbelief, I showed them the TikTok I'd made, proof of my whereabouts, but they remained convinced of their encounter. This eerie incident unsettled us for the remainder of our trip and even unnerved our date directors. To this day, I have no rational explanation. If it had been just one person claiming to have seen me, I might have attributed it to the heat or the eerie atmosphere of the catacombs. But the fact that 4 to 5 individuals, all of whom knew me well, insisted on having interacted with me down there leaves me baffled. Could it have been a case of mistaken identity, a trick of the light, or something more unexplainable? The mystery of my apparent doppelganger in Malta's catacombs remains unsolved, a puzzling anecdote in an otherwise routine archaeological excursion. Story 7. The Phantom Guest at the Old Manor. It was during the summer of 2018 when I stayed at a historic manor turned guest house in the English countryside. The manor, dating back to the 16th century, was known for its picturesque gardens and an eerie charm. I was there for a weekend getaway, hoping to find some peace away from the city's hustle. On my second night, I decided to explore the manor's extensive library. The room, lined with shelves of ancient books, exuded a sense of timelessness. As I browsed through the collection, I stumbled upon an old family album of the manor's original inhabitants. One photograph, in particular, caught my attention, a portrait of a young woman, elegantly dressed, her expression somber yet captivating. Later that night, as I retired to my room, the image of the woman stayed with me. Around midnight, I was roused from my sleep by a faint sound of music. It seemed to be coming from downstairs. Curious and somewhat unsettled, I got out of bed and followed the sound. The music led me to the main hall, where I saw something that defied explanation. There, in the dim moonlight shining through the tall windows, was the woman from the photograph. She was dancing alone, her movements graceful yet haunting. The hall, which was empty and silent during the day, now echoed with the sounds of a phantom ball. I stood there, hidden in the shadows, watching this spectral dance. The woman seemed lost in her own world, unaware of my presence. Her dress swayed as she moved, the fabric shimmering in the moonlight. As the clock struck 1, she stopped and looked directly at me. Her eyes, full of sorrow, seemed to pierce my soul. Then, in a whisper that filled the room, she said, "Do not forget me." The music ceased abruptly, and she vanished, leaving me alone in the silence of the night. I returned to my room, my mind swirling with questions. The next morning, I asked the staff about the woman, but no one could offer any explanation. They said the manor had its fair share of legends, but none like what I described. As I left the manor, I looked back at the building, its walls holding the secrets of centuries. The encounter with the phantom dancer remained with me, a chilling yet poignant reminder of the past's lingering presence. Story 8. Last night, I found myself drifting off to sleep on the couch, the TV's murmurs fading into the background. My dog, Max, had already claimed the other couch, his gentle snores a familiar and comforting sound in the quiet of the evening. Sometime in the middle of the night, I was startled awake by a soft giggling. The room was dimly lit by the moonlight spilling through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. Rubbing my eyes, I tried to orient myself, but what caught my attention was a small, ethereal figure by Max's couch. There, in the pale moonlight, was the silhouette of a young child, no more than a toddler, gently petting Max. The child appeared all white and somewhat translucent, like a wisp of fog-given form. I squinted, trying to discern any details, but the figure was blurry, its edges melting into the shadows. As I watched, frozen in disbelief, the child looked over at me. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Then, with a playful giggle, the child darted off towards the kitchen. I heard the distinct sound of little feet pattering against the hardwood floor, followed by the noise of cabinet doors being opened and items being shuffled around. My heart raced, adrenaline coursing through my veins. This couldn't be real. I thought of hypnagogic hallucinations, those vivid, dreamlike experiences that occur on the cusp of sleep. But this felt alarmingly real. Gathering my courage, I stood up and cautiously made my way to the kitchen, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The kitchen was in semi-darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of the streetlight outside. I flicked on the lights, half expecting to see the child rummaging through the pantry. But there was nothing. The cabinets were closed, and the kitchen was as I had left it earlier that night. No sign of the mysterious child, no trace of anyone having been there. The only sound was Max, now awake, padding softly into the kitchen behind me, his nose to the ground as if searching for the visitor. I checked the entire house, every nook and cranny, but it was all in vain. Everything was as it should be. Windows locked, doors secured. No evidence of an intruder. And yet, the feeling of having seen something otherworldly lingered. Returning to the living room, I sat there, trying to make sense of what had happened. Max curled up beside me, his presence a small comfort against the unnerving experience. Was it just a trick of the mind, a fragment of a dream lingering into wakefulness? Or had I witnessed something paranormal, a visitation from a spirit or an entity from beyond? I couldn't shake off the feeling of that encounter, the innocent giggle and the fleeting glimpse of the childlike figure. As the first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, I remained on the couch, wide awake, pondering the mysterious, otherworldly visitation that had turned an ordinary night into an enigma. Story 9. The Whispering Room in the Abandoned Hospital. In the fall of 2015, I found myself drawn to urban exploration, especially of abandoned and decaying structures. There was something eerily captivating about these places, holding stories and secrets of the past. My most unforgettable experience was at an old, abandoned hospital on the outskirts of my hometown. The hospital had been closed since the early 90s, and over the years, it had become a shell of its former self, with broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, and an oppressive air of neglect. Local legends spoke of strange occurrences within its walls, but I was a skeptic, driven more by curiosity and the thrill of exploration than by ghost stories. Equipped with a flashlight and a camera, I entered the hospital one chilly October evening. The corridors were a maze of peeling paint, rusted equipment, and debris. As I made my way through the dimly lit halls, a sense of unease grew within me. The silence of the hospital was oppressive, broken only by my footsteps and the occasional drip of water. I reached a section of the hospital that seemed older than the rest, the air growing colder as I proceeded. That's when I found the room. It was an ordinary room at first glance, but as I stepped inside, I heard it, a faint whispering. It sounded like hushed voices, overlapping and indistinct. I froze, straining to listen, but the more I focused, the more disoriented I became. The whispers seemed to be coming from all directions, yet nowhere in particular. I raised my camera to take a photo, hoping to capture something, anything, that could explain the whispers. The moment the flash lit up the room, the whispering stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was overwhelming. I quickly reviewed the photo, but it showed only the empty, decaying room. Feeling unnerved, I decided to leave, quickening my pace with each step. As I hurried through the corridors, the whispers returned, growing louder as if following me. I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally emerged from the building, the whispering ceased and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Back home, I reviewed the photos and did some research on the hospital. I discovered that the section I had ventured into was the oldest part of the hospital, dating back to the early 1900s. It was rumored to have been used for psychiatric patients, many of whom were subjected to now outdated and cruel treatments. Though I returned to urban exploration, I never went back to that hospital. The experience in the whispering room left me with more questions than answers. Was it the echo of past sufferings, a trick of the wind, or something more inexplicable? The memory of those whispers, resonating in the abandoned halls, remains a haunting reminder of the hospital's dark history. Story 10. I've always prided myself on being grounded in reality, with a healthy skepticism for anything that ventures into the realm of the supernatural. My friend shares a similar mindset. We're both from families that have been rooted in our city for over a century, particularly in the neighborhood where this baffling incident occurred. It was a crisp, cold evening, and my lifelong friend and I were waiting outside a club near an old candy factory that's been a staple in the area for about 100 years. The factory's vents were expelling warm air, a welcome relief from the biting cold. We, along with a few acquaintances, huddled near the vents, our jackets left behind in the car in a misguided attempt to look cool in the chilly night. I was chatting with a girl, leaning casually against the factory wall, while my friend was engaged in conversation with a group on the opposite side of the sidewalk. Suddenly, something inexplicable happened. Both of us, conditioned by years of city living to be highly aware of our surroundings, simultaneously snapped our heads towards the space between us. I saw a figure briskly walking past us. It was a fleeting sight, but I remember it being roughly my height, about 5'8", and wearing a hat. It was more of a blur, a motion rather than a distinct image. I thought to dismiss it as a trick of the light or my imagination, but then my friend spoke up, visibly shaken. "WTF, did you just see that?" he asked. He described seeing someone much shorter than his 6'2" frame briskly walking past. Like me, he couldn't make out their face, which he rationalized could be due to the figure wearing a brimmed hat and his taller perspective. This coincidence was unsettling. As a logical person, I could have explained away my own experience as a momentary illusion. However, the fact that my friend, with his different vantage point and skeptical nature, witnessed something that matched my own perception was deeply disconcerting. We both reacted at the exact same moment, an alignment that seemed beyond mere coincidence. The event left us pondering over possibilities we normally scoff at. Could it have been a ghost? The thought seemed ludicrous, but the history of the area, with generations of people treading the same path, huddling for warmth by the factory, maybe, just maybe, had imprinted some sort of energy or memory in that spot. Or perhaps it was a brief rift in time, a glimpse into a dimension or reality that we, as humans, are yet to comprehend. In the days that followed, my friend and I revisited the incident multiple times, each discussion leaving us more perplexed than before. Neither of us could come up with a rational explanation. Our shared experience, in a place steeped in the history of our ancestors, challenged our skepticism and opened our minds to the mysteries that might lurk in the corners of our logical, well-understood world. The figure, whoever or whatever it was, remains an enigma, a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit in the picture of our reality. Story 11. Possible paranormal presence? Hello, 6 months ago, my wife and I moved into an apartment that has since been the stage for a series of increasingly strange occurrences. For context, I identify as agnostic, while my wife is an active practitioner of witchcraft. She even has a discreet altar, cleverly concealed as a small closet built into a wall of our home. From the outset, there was an unmistakable, peculiar energy permeating the apartment. Our cats, usually adaptable, displayed unmistakable signs of distress. For the first few weeks, they seemed utterly terrified, a behavior I initially dismissed as a typical feline reaction to a new environment. However, their consistent fixation on certain spots, particularly doorways, where they would sit and stare into the void for hours, was unsettling. To this day, they seem genuinely at ease only when both my wife and I are present in the same room with them. The unnerving experiences escalated from there. Independently, both my wife and I have observed a humanoid shadowy figure. It appears randomly, sometimes in doorways, other times in the archway leading to the kitchen. It's a fleeting but clear presence, an undefined silhouette that vanishes as soon as you try to focus on it. My bouts of insomnia have added another layer to these experiences. On nights when I can't sleep, I retreat to my office to avoid disturbing my wife. On several occasions, she has awoken feeling my presence in the bed, only to find it empty upon checking. I initially brushed off her experiences as imagination until I encountered the same phenomenon. One night, I awoke with the distinct sensation of my wife curled up behind me. The feeling was so convincing that I rolled over to embrace her, only to find the bed empty. She was, in fact, in the office that night, unable to sleep. The realism of that moment was startling. One evening, as we lay in bed, we heard the unmistakable sound of the bed springs compressing at the foot of the bed, as if someone had abruptly sat down or stepped onto it. This was particularly strange given that our bed, a new hybrid model, had never exhibited such a sound before. On another occasion, we were watching a movie in the office with our cats. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a shadow darting towards the bathroom. I initially dismissed it as a trick of the light. However, glancing at my wife, I saw that she was visibly shaken. She recounted seeing a shadowy figure looming in front of her hidden altar before swiftly moving towards the bathroom. We were both so unsettled by the incident that we felt compelled to leave the apartment for a while. Upon our return, everything seemed to revert to a state of calm. Later that week, after using the restroom, I closed the bathroom door and walked back to my bedroom. To my surprise, I heard the distinct creak of the door reopening on its own. Unnerved, I hurried back to bed. Since then, both my wife and I have continued to witness the bathroom door inexplicably opening and closing on its own. We've also been startled by loud crashes and bangs, occurring even when our cats are calmly seated in the same room with us, ruling them out as the source of these noises. The apartment, an older building from the early 1970s, has its share of quirks, but these events seem to go beyond mere structural or mechanical issues. Considering my wife's practice of witchcraft, which she has not actively engaged in for several months, we've wondered if these occurrences could be related. Could it be the spirit of someone who once lived here? Is it possible that the presence is drawn to or disturbed by my wife's altar? Or could it be something else entirely? While we haven't felt threatened by these occurrences, they're certainly unnerving. We've made a conscious effort to not focus too much attention on them, hoping that this might diminish their frequency or intensity. It's peculiar, though, how these events seem to predominantly occur in doorways. Is there some significance to these thresholds that we're unaware of? Story 12. Last November, an event occurred that profoundly changed my perception of life and death. It was the passing of my first love, a man who had once meant everything to me. He died in his sleep, the cause I later learned was a heart attack. This incident alone was heartbreaking, but what made it extraordinary was the visit I received from him the night of his death. That night, something surreal happened. He appeared in my room, as vivid and tangible as any living person. He was the young man I remembered, his features unmarred by time. I could feel the texture of his leather jacket as he pulled me from my bed to embrace me. It was a moment of both awe and fear, for he simply stated his name and announced he was there to say goodbye. When he hugged and kissed me, a chill enveloped me, so intense that I felt like I was hugging a cold, unyielding wall. It was only later that I realized this intense coldness was either due to our brief touch or his spectral presence. In that moment, confused and overwhelmed, I reached for my blanket, seeking some comfort in its familiarity. But then, I decided to wake myself from what I thought was a dream, because something deep within me knew that this was an occurrence far from ordinary. We had been separated for 10 years, our lives taking different paths after a love that had once burned so brightly. 2 days after his visit, a friend called to inform me of his death. I was stunned, partly because a part of me had always hoped we might reconcile. The previous summer, his parents had visited my family, asking me to speak to him. He wanted to apologize for the pain he had caused me during our relationship. He was wealthy, surrounded by friends and girlfriends, but he lacked respect for me, leading to our eventual separation. After my family went bankrupt, I found myself working various jobs in different countries. I am Croatian, and this kind of life was not unfamiliar to me. That summer, he tried to reach out, calling from unknown numbers, once even demanding that I return home. But by then, I had lost many friends due to our financial situation and other issues, so reconnecting with him seemed an impossible task. I had always harbored a hope of seeing him again, but that hope was dashed when I learned he was only 39 at the time of his passing. Since then, life has been an uphill battle, and his death only added to the weight of my struggles. He was the only man I had ever been with, and the void he left seems to grow with time. Things had been getting increasingly difficult for me, but since his visit, I've come to believe that I must carry on, despite the hardships. I am not one to consider ending my life, but I find myself longing for a reprieve from this relentless struggle. His visit, though haunting, did leave me with a sliver of hope. It was a stark reminder that life, no matter how challenging, is not in vain. There is a purpose, a greater narrative we are all a part of, even if it doesn't make sense to us as individuals. It's about the collective human experience, the shared journey of life and beyond. I've often wondered if anyone else has had similar experiences with loved ones who have passed. I've kept this story to myself, mostly due to my limited English and the complexity of my emotions. But that night and the weeks that followed were filled with occurrences and feelings that are difficult to articulate. The only true gift he left me with from beyond the grave was the belief that life, in all its mystery and pain, holds a deeper meaning. Story 13. Tall, dark figure with glowing white eyes. The experience I'm about to share occurred just 10 minutes ago. I'm still trembling as I write this, so please forgive any incoherence in my recounting. For context, I'm currently stationed on a military base in North Carolina, right beside the vast, sprawling ocean. Living here, the proximity to the water has always been a source of comfort for me, especially during times of stress. Tonight was one such time. Feeling the weight of my duties and the general strain of life on base, I decided to take a drive. It's a ritual I've come to rely on, a way to clear my head. I set out towards a secluded spot, a tranquil inlet where the ocean meets a river, nestled in a remote corner of the region. It's a place I've visited countless times, a personal haven where I've spent countless hours reflecting and rejuvenating. The drive there was uneventful, the familiar road unwinding under the glow of the moon. However, as I neared my usual parking spot, something felt amiss. It's hard to describe, but the air seemed charged with an odd, unsettling energy. It was as if the very atmosphere had shifted, becoming dense and foreboding. This sensation was so strong, so palpable, that I decided to cut my visit short. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was amiss in the stillness of the night. With a sense of urgency, I started driving back towards the barracks. The road, a narrow stretch of dirt bordered by fields of tall grass, was bathed in an eerie silver light. My headlights cut through the darkness, casting long, dancing shadows. That's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. It was a figure, tall and imposing, standing at the edge of the road. My heart skipped a beat as I slowed down, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure was easily 8 feet tall, shrouded in darkness, its form barely discernible against the night. But its eyes, they were unmistakable. Bright, glowing white, they seemed to pierce through the darkness, locking onto mine with an intensity that felt almost physical. As I watched, frozen in place, the figure began to move. Its movements were unnatural, jerky and fluid at the same time, as if it wasn't bound by the laws of physics. It crossed the road, never breaking its gaze, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as though it was staring into the very depths of my soul, seeing things I couldn't even articulate to myself. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. It slipped into the field of tall grass, disappearing from sight but not from my mind. The afterimage of those glowing eyes lingered in my vision, a haunting reminder of what I had just witnessed. I wish I had captured it on video, documented this inexplicable encounter. But in that moment, my only thought was to get away, to put as much distance between myself and that figure as possible. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel as I accelerated, the barracks my only goal. Now, safely back in my room, the image of that tall, dark figure with its glowing white eyes is seared into my memory. I can't explain what I saw, and a part of me isn't sure I want to. All I know is that the night, once a source of solace, now holds a tinge of fear and mystery. What was that figure? Why was it there, and why did it fixate on me? These questions whirl in my mind, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. For now, I'm left with only the memory of those glowing white eyes, a haunting, unforgettable sight. Story 14. I've always approached life with a rational, scientific mindset, being an engineer by education and career. This, of course, means that I've been somewhat skeptical about paranormal phenomena. However, my wife, whom I'll refer to as Elle, has always harbored a deep fascination with the supernatural, standing in stark contrast to my skepticism. Despite my usual reservations, there have been certain experiences in our lives that I struggle to rationalize, the most bewildering of which occurred during a ghost tour in St. Augustine, Florida, in September 2022. In the weeks leading up to this trip, Elle had indulged in a Reiki massage, which concluded with a tarot card reading. The masseuse, during this session, remarked that Elle seemed enveloped in an exceptionally high level of energy. The tarot reader, too, had something intriguing to share. She informed Elle that she was accompanied daily by a guardian angel identified as the Archangel Michael. I listened to these accounts with a degree of skepticism, taking them with a grain of salt and not dwelling on them too much. Fast forward to our St. Augustine adventure, where we found ourselves participating in a walking ghost tour. Elle, being wheelchair-bound, was with me as we joined a small group consisting of just the tour guide and another couple. The tour meandered through the historic and eerily charming streets of the city, eventually leading us into a narrow, shadow-draped alleyway steeped in history and lore. As part of the experience, the tour guide had equipped us with various paranormal detection tools, including EMF, electromagnetic field meters. Initially, these devices remained silent, unresponsive to the storied surroundings. However, as the guide delved deeper into the alley's past, the meter in Elle's hand sprung to life. It showed intense activity, frequently hitting the maximum on its gauge. In stark contrast, the meter I held, despite standing mere inches from Elle, remained eerily quiet, as did the guides. The other couple, who had wandered slightly away, returned to find their devices silent too, while Elle's continued to display significant EMF activity. Curious, we experimented a bit. We found that our meters would activate when brought close to Elle, only to fall silent once more as we stepped back. The tour guide, meanwhile, began using a spirit box, a device I skeptically viewed as nothing more than a detuned AM radio that had so far produced only static. With all of us gathered, the guide asked into the void if someone was with us. To our collective surprise, a distinct yes cut through the static, heard clearly by all five of us. Up to this point, no one in the group, apart from Elle and myself, was aware of her experience with the Reiki healer and the mention of Archangel Michael. The spirit box, after acknowledging its presence, fell back into static until the guide inquired if the entity could reveal its name. The static ceased abruptly, and the word Michael resonated clearly through the silence. I was astounded, bordering on disbelief. Following this revelation, Elle shared her experience from the Reiki session with the group. The guide, perhaps now more intrigued, asked the spirit box if Michael was present to protect Elle. A moment passed before the box affirmed with a clear yes, heard by all of us. I was left utterly dumbfounded by the experience. The rational part of my mind struggled to find a logical explanation. Could it have been a mere coincidence, or had we somehow manifested this response ourselves? It was perplexing, to say the least. Regardless of the how and why, the fact remained that this inexplicable event had occurred, and it left me reevaluating my stance on the paranormal. How could such a precise and relevant response arise in a group of strangers, completely unaware of Elle's previous encounter with the concept of her guardian angel? It was a mystery that lingered long after the ghost tour had ended, a mystery that continues to intrigue and puzzle me to this day. Story 15. The dream I had last night was so vivid and unexpected that it has left me pondering its significance and origin. Was it a visitation from the beyond, or merely a fabrication of my subconscious? My stepmom's mother, who passed away 15 years ago, was a notable figure in my early years. Though our relationship wasn't profoundly deep, she was a constant presence. I have these fragmented childhood memories of her babysitting me and those family gatherings at her house for dinners and holidays. She was known to be a bit sour and disagreeable, but towards me, she always seemed to soften, sharing amusing anecdotes about my younger days. Reflecting on our bond, it strikes me as peculiar that she would choose to visit me in a dream. We were blood related, and she had her own grandchildren who, to my knowledge, haven't experienced such visitations. Why would she come to me, of all people? Her death, when it came, was a moment of sadness but not a profound personal loss. However, shortly after she passed, I had this intense dream. In it, she was stepping out of a car. As I moved to embrace her, she collapsed into my arms. I awoke with a jolt, feeling an overwhelming sense of finality, as if it were a farewell. Last night, after all these years, she appeared again in my dream. Her entrance was so sudden and clear that it caught me off guard. As someone who often has lucid dreams, I was acutely aware of the implications of her presence. Yet, she uttered no words. Her mere presence was potent and unmistakable. In that moment, a thought crossed my mind with uncharacteristic clarity. She was there to deliver a message. The message seemed to be a silent admonition, a nudge to pull myself together. Lately, life has been throwing curveballs my way. I've found myself drowning in stress, turning increasingly to alcohol as a crutch, and just generally feeling out of sorts. Her appearance in my dream felt like an intervention, a silent yet stern reminder to get my act together. It's strange, considering my closest family and friends live abroad, far removed from my daily struggles. To them, on the surface, I appear to be managing well. But deep down, there are issues they are privy to. So, the idea that someone or something could perceive these hidden troubles is both comforting and unnerving. Waking from the dream, I was engulfed in a sea of confusion. How do we discern the line between reality and imagination? There had been no recent reminders of her, no mention of her name to trigger such a vivid dream. It felt too random, too inexplicable to be just a creation of my mind. Now, I'm left questioning the nature of such experiences. Are these dreams a bridge to something beyond our understanding, or are they simply the mind's way of processing hidden emotions and fears? The line between reality and the constructs of our imagination seems blurrier than ever. As the final moments of our journey through the eerie and unexplainable draw to a close, I want to express my deepest gratitude for accompanying me on this chilling adventure. We traversed the realms of the supernatural, delving into stories that challenge our understanding of the world around us. From trolls lurking in attics to doppelgängers wandering ancient catacombs, we've encountered entities and phenomena that defy logical explanation. But now, I turn to you, the brave souls who join me in this exploration of the unknown. What are your thoughts on these tales? Have you ever experienced something beyond the realm of the ordinary, something that left you questioning the very fabric of reality? Share your stories and insights in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation, delving deeper into the mysteries that surround us. And remember, if you enjoyed this spine-tingling journey through Teddy's nightmares, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Your support helps keep the flames of curiosity and exploration burning bright. Join us again for our next episode, where we'll unveil more tales of the paranormal and the unexplained. Until then, keep your eyes open and your mind alert. You never know what mysteries lurk just around the corner. Goodbye for now, and see you in the next video.